The self-defense instructor barely hid his smirk as she fumbled the first drill. Across the mat, two women whispered, their eyes lingering on her faded workout clothes and scuffed sneakers. She kept her breathing steady, letting the instructor's sighs and the sidelong glances pass through her, careful not to react. When she missed the timing on a basic block, the instructor made a show of disappointment. During the water break, her bag tipped over. The gymnasium went silent as a sleek, black badge slid across the floretchid, with symbols few outside clandestine circles had ever seen, a classified emblem reserved for those who operated in shadows. The whispers stopped, faces drained of color. In that suspended moment, no one could have guessed how easily she blended in, or how deliberately she chose to remain unseen. She entered the community center as dusk settled outside, letting the glass doors close behind her. The gym's fluorescent lights cast a pale, institutional glow over the linoleum, which bore the marks of countless sneakers and chairs. Bulletin boards, cluttered with yoga schedules and lost pet flyers, framed the edges of the lobby. The air held the faint bite of chlorine from the pool next door, mingled with the sterile tang of industrial cleaner. At the check-in desk, she wrote her name in block letters, each stroke practiced and unremarkable. The receptionist, distracted by her computer screen, gestured absently toward the gymnasium. She followed the hallway, the sounds of muffled conversation and the rhythmic thud of bodies on mats growing sharper with each step. This class, just another line in her cover story, offered the anonymity she required. Inside, a dozen people clustered in small groups, stretching or chatting. There was a quiet hierarchy. New athletic gear on some, faded shirts and shorts on others. She placed her duffel bag along the back wall, its canvas softened by years of use, and took up a spot away from the center. No one greeted her. She preferred it that way. The instructor, broad-shouldered, late 30s, surveyed the group as he warmed up, his gaze passing over her as if she were a fixture of the gym. Nearby, a woman in a pristine tracksuit nudged her friend, both glancing at the newcomer's plain sneakers and thrifted sweatpants with faint amusement. She maintained a neutral posture, shoulders relaxed, chin neither lifted nor lowered, her presence measured and unremarkable. It was the stance of someone trained to observe without being observed. The instructor clapped his hands and began roll call, his tone brisk. A few participants jogged in place, eager and bright-eyed. She joined in, matching the movements with just enough effort to blend in, careful not to draw notice. Her mind catalogued the room, the exits, the distance between mats, the way the instructor's voice carried. She kept her breathing even, her focus split between the routine and the undercurrent of judgment from the sidelines. During warm-ups, a tall woman with a confident stride drifted closer. "New to this?" she asked, her tone friendly, but edged with polite superiority. The words were less about curiosity and more about establishing order. "Yeah," she replied, her voice low but steady, offering no further detail. The instructor's whistle cut through the chatter, signaling the start of drills. He demonstrated a basic wrist lock, his motions slow and exaggerated for the benefit of beginners. Some participants nodded, eager to mimic. She watched, hands loose at her sides, giving away nothing of her experience. When it came time to pair up, the familiar clicks formed quickly. She was left standing until a stocky man approached, his expression resigned as he reached for her wrist. She let him, offering no resistance. The gym filled with the shuffle of feet and low conversation, the sort of background noise that made it easy to disappear. She moved through the motions, careful to remain just another face in the crowd as the instructor prepared to call the group together for the first drill. Pairs shifted and settled. The instructor's voice cut through the low chatter, outlining the first drill, a basic wrist escape, demonstrated with brisk efficiency. He showed the group how to break a grip, his movements practiced, the lesson delivered in clipped commands. Partners found each other. A woman in high-end athletic wear hesitated, then approached the newcomer with a look of mild annoyance, as if drawing the short straw. Without introduction, they squared off. The woman's grip tightened, more forceful than necessary. The newcomer's hand twitched, but her expression never changed. She moved through the motions, not quite matching the instructor's timing, her attempts just awkward enough to confirm the other's assumptions. A snicker rose from the next pair. The woman corrected her, voice edged with impatience. No, twist under, not over. Then demonstrated again, slower this time. The newcomer nodded, silent. She repeated the movement, still off-tempo, her hand slipping free in a way that looked accidental. The ponytailed woman glanced at her friends, rolling her eyes. "You have to commit," she said, louder than necessary, "or it won't work." Nearby, the instructor stopped to observe. He watched the newcomer fumble the drill once more. "You're overthinking it," he said, tone hovering just above condescension. "It's not brain surgery, just turn your body." She catalogued the advice, mentally noting the angle of his wrist, the tension in his stance, the way he favored his right side. She sampled his instructions as data points, not out of confusion but out of habit, her face unreadable. He lingered a moment, waiting for a reaction. She offered nothing, no apology, no explanation. Just the careful neutrality of someone accustomed to being underestimated. Satisfied or perhaps annoyed by her silence, he moved on. The ponytailed woman muttered something under her breath, her friend smothering a laugh. The drill continued. She struggled through the wrist escape, drawing more glances and a few quiet snickers, but her face remained inscrutable, masking the fact she was gathering data on every student's technique, their strengths, their tells, the way their bodies telegraphed movement. Each failed attempt seemed to confirm the group's first impression. She was out of her depth, a novice among the more practiced. The instructor's attention drifted elsewhere. He offered encouragement and easy camaraderie to others, but when the newcomer misstepped and collided with another pair, he sighed loud enough for the room to notice before turning away. As the drill wound down, the group's energy shifted. The instructor announced a water break. The mats emptied in a flurry of bright bottles and quick laughter, the air thick with the easy confidence of those who belonged. The newcomer sat alone, back against the wall, her stainless steel canteen resting quietly in her hands. She watched the clusters form, the lines of belonging drawn and redrawn with every sidelong glance. The room's hum sharpened, and the distance between her and the others became more defined, setting the stage for what would follow. Laughter swelled from the cluster near the mats, sharp and unguarded. The woman with the high ponytail leaned in, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "I swear she's using a duffel from the Cold War," she said, her friends grinning at the joke. A man in compression sleeves stretched his legs, adding, "Probably found it in her granddad's attic." The group dissolved into another round of snickers. The newcomer sat apart, spine aligned with the cinder block wall, canteen balanced in her hand. Her grip remained steady, fingers relaxed around the metal, betraying no tremor. The ponytailed woman wiped her mouth, lowering her voice only slightly. "At least match it with some decent shoes. I think she's wearing actual Kmart specials." The words drew a ripple of laughter, heads turning to catch the next punchline. A few faces from other groups glanced over, some joining in with a smirk, others pretending not to notice. The instructor walked by, clipboard tucked under his arm, offering no rebuke. He checked his watch, more for effect than necessity, and called out, 5 minutes left, though the clock disagreed. The newcomer's features stayed composed, her face unreadable in either, blank nor wounded, but set with the kind of detachment learned through repetition. Inside, a flicker of her pulse registered the ridicule, then settled beneath a layer of iron-cold resolve. She let the noise wash over her, cataloguing faces and voices, noting who joined in and who looked away. This was not new. Training had taught her the value of stillness, of not feeding a fire with reaction. She focused on the task at hand. Observe, record, remain unseen. The group's laughter peaked when someone pantomimed her earlier fumble, arms flailing in a crude imitation. No one intervened. The room's alliances had been drawn. The instructor paused, glancing at the source of the commotion. "Having fun?" he asked. But the question was rhetorical. The ponytailed woman flashed a grin. "Just reviewing the moves." He smirked, his gaze flicking to the newcomer. "Maybe some people need more review time than others." The group's amusement lingered as he moved to the stereo. She set her canteen down, careful not to make a sound, and stretched her arms overhead, movement precise and unhurried. The sweatshirt shifted, revealing the hint of muscle beneath. She exhaled, lowering her arms as the instructor called the class back to order. Murmurs and chuckles persisted, the undercurrent of mockery not quite spent. Someone near the back whispered a wager on her next mistake, the words clipped short by the instructor's whistle. She took her place in the line, hands loose at her sides, eyes forward. As the group shuffled back to their spots, she moved toward her bag at the edge of the mat, the canvas darkened at the corners from years of use. A scuffed sneaker nudged her duffel as the class regrouped, the bag listing sideways. She reached for it just as the zipper gave way, and the contents tumbled out across the floor. A tube of lip balm spun toward the nearest mat. The battered notebook landed open, pages fanned and marked with the ghost of old handwriting. The stainless steel canteen rolled in a lazy arc, coming to rest beneath a bench. For a moment, the scene passed as another small mishap, drawing only a few idle glances from the group. Then a small black case slid into the open, the matte leather catching no light, only deepening the shadow around it. It was unremarkable in size, unadorned except for the faintest scuff near the hinge. The clasp, jarred by the fall, snapped open with a metallic clicker sound that seemed to puncture the low hum of voices in the gym. The lid fell back, revealing a pin no bigger than a postage stamp. The emblem was a falcon, wings tucked, talons curled around a lightning bolt. Its lines were precise, the black and silver finish worn smooth by years of careful handling. For those who understood such things, it was unmistakable, a symbol classified under Special Operations Directive 4, known only to a handful who had agreed to vanish from official record. The chatter at the edge of the room faltered, then stopped altogether. A former Army reservist, halfway through a stretch, froze with his hands on his knees. The woman with the high ponytail stared, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition. The instructor, who had been calling out instructions, trailed off mid-sentence. The silence spread outward in a slow wave, swallowing the clatter of water bottles and the shuffle of feet. She moved with the same economy as always, but now every gesture was watched. Her hand hovered over the case for a fraction of a second before she snapped it closed with practiced certainty. She gathered the scattered item slip balm, notebook, canteen placing each back into the bag with deliberate care. The emblem case went in last, tucked beneath a folded sweatshirt. She zipped the duffel, the teeth meshing with a subdued rasp, and stood. Her posture shifted, the set of her shoulders no longer apologetic, but quietly resolute. No one spoke. The instructor's clipboard slipped from his grip, the impact sharp in the hush. He did not move to retrieve it. The room's atmosphere thickened, brittle and expectant, as if waiting for someone to name what they had just witnessed. The newcomer met the instructor's gaze, her expression unchanged, neither inviting nor dismissing questions. The moment held, suspended at the edge of something about to break, as the group tried to reconcile what they thought they knew with what had just been revealed. The gym's lights pressed down on the room, white and relentless, as the recognition set in. The instructor, who had spent the last hour projecting easy authority, stood motionless. His shoulders, once squared, now dipped by degrees, the whistle at his neck swinging with the slight tremor he couldn't suppress. He stared at the black case in her hand, his mouth working soundlessly, eyes darting between the emblem and the woman who had carried it in without a word. Across the mats, a woman in an Air Force t-shirt tone of the few who had stretched with real precision drew in a sharp breath. Her hand rose to her collarbone, fingers pressing as if to check for something hidden beneath the cotton. She stepped back, shoes squeaking, the sound slicing through the charged stillness. The rest of the group hovered between confusion and dawning comprehension, their faces shifting as they recalculated every careless word and sideways glance. In the silence, the newcomer's mind flicked through operational protocols. Assess, contain, control. Her training surfaced, cool and automatic, guiding each movement. She turned the case over once, thumb finding the latch, and closed it with a muted click. The sound cut through the hush, a mechanical punctuation to the moment. She bent for her notebook, the motion clean and balanced, her body language no longer uncertain. Every action gathering the scattered items, aligning them in the duffel was measured, deliberate, the practiced economy of someone who understood the value of control under scrutiny. She straightened, and the subtle shift in her stance was unmistakable. Her feet set slightly wider, shoulders aligning without effort, chin lifted just enough to change the angle of her gaze. The air around her thickened, the space she occupied expanding, not through force but through quiet certainty. She did not fidget or smooth her hair. She simply stood, letting the silence settle, her presence now impossible to overlook. The instructor's clipboard slipped from his hand, the plastic cracking against the floor. He didn't reach for it. His hands hovered at his sides, fingers flexing as if searching for something to hold on to. The woman in the Air Force shirt kept her arms rigid, as if bracing for orders. The rest of the class watched, waiting for a Q&A sign of what was expected now that the reality of her background had shifted the room's balance. Her breath moved in and out, steady and unhurried. The only sound was the faint buzz of the lights, the collective anticipation holding everyone in place. She felt the weight of their attention, the sudden reversal of power. There was no satisfaction in it, only the familiar clarity that came with Commandant old reflex settling into her bones. Her gaze moved to the instructor. He tried, and failed, to meet it. She adjusted the duffel on her shoulder, the strap fitting perfectly into the groove above her collarbone. When she shifted her weight forward, it was a signal small, precise, unmistakable. The room waited, the air thick with questions no one dared to voice. The instructor's jaw tensed, words caught behind his teeth. She watched him, silent, her presence filling the space between them as the moment stretched, ready for whatever came next. A shift moved through the gym, subtle but unmistakable. The instructor's first attempt at speech came out thin, his hands rising in a gesture that hovered between apology and defense. "Listen, The words faltered, his voice stripped of its earlier authority. He tried again, but the second attempt tangled itself into a single, hurried phrase. The room registered the panic in his posture as much as his toned shoulders hunched, gaze fixed, the practiced confidence of an instructor replaced by the unease of someone suddenly outranked. The newcomer didn't advance or retreat. She adjusted her stance, widening her feet just enough to distribute her weight, a nonverbal cue, honed by years of training. No crouch, no overt threat, just the kind of poised readiness that communicates, without question, who is now in control. The former reservist saw it instantly, her own body responding with a half-step back. Others followed, their movements unconscious, as if some ancient instinct recognized the change in hierarchy before their minds caught up. The instructor's next words spilled out too quickly, an attempt to regain footing. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, but the phrase hung in the air, ineffective. The newcomer raised her hand, palm open at waist height, fingers relaxed. The gesture was quiet, almost casual, but in its simplicity carried the weight of a battlefield commander signal that needed no translation. The group stilled, the shift in authority complete. In that moment, her operative training was clear. Control the room without a word. Assert intent through economy of movement. Her presence alone demanded attention. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of someone's breath catching. The newcomer's gaze swept the group, not searching for confrontation but marking each face, her eyes now sharp and deliberate. Those who had mocked her earlier shrank into themselves, hands fidgeting or arms locked at their sides, the bravado of moments before replaced by a wary deference. The man who had laughed loudest wiped his palms on his shorts, his throat working as he tried to swallow. The woman who had exaggerated the drill kept her eyes fixed ahead, unwilling to risk meeting the newcomer's gaze. The instructor's clipboard lay at his feet, forgotten. He didn't reach for it. His attention remained fixed on the woman before him, shoulders drawn in as if bracing for a reprimand. The group's earlier energy, laughter, easy confidence, the careless teasing had drained away, replaced by a brittle stillness. No one dared speak, every movement measured, as if afraid to draw notice. The newcomer's stance remained unchanged, Her duffel now rested against her hip, the strap cinched tight, every detail of her posture underlined by purpose. The drills she'd fumbled, the awkward timing, now recontextualized deliberate missteps, not incompetence. She had been testing the room, measuring responses, gathering information. The realization settled over the group, cold and undeniable. She shifted her weight forward, just enough to signal intent. The group responded with a collective intake of breath, the room held in suspension. The instructor's mouth opened, but no apology came. The newcomer exhaled, a controlled breath, her fingers flexing once before settling again. Each movement was precise, the kind of control that doesn't need to be explained. She turned her head, meeting the instructor's eyes directly. He looked away first. She let the silence stretch, her presence holding the room in place. Then, with a small adjustment, chin raised, hands clasped loosely, she signaled the next move. The group waited, uncertain, the balance of power unmistakably altered. The silence lingered, thick and expectant, as all eyes remained on her. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the mat, not the faces watching her. The wristlock escape. Her voice was steady, quiet, the words delivered without invitation or apology. In a single, unhurried motion, she demonstrated the technique, her forearm pivoting, elbow slicing through the air, the grip broken with surgical precision. Where before she'd stumbled, now there was no wasted movement, no hesitation. The break was clean, efficient, final. She shifted her stance, feet aligning, hips settling as if she'd practiced this 1,000 times in silence. The block. Her arm came up, the angle exact, the path of momentum redirected with the smallest arc. Not the exaggerated sweep she'd feigned earlier, but the kind of movement that left no opening, no doubt. In 2 movements, she erased every awkward attempt from earlier, every sidelong glance, every whispered critique. A student who had laughed at her shoes watched, jaw slack. The thought flickered behind her eyes. She just undid 6 weeks of training in 3 seconds. The instructor's hands hovered at his sides, fingers twitching, his mind working to reconcile the woman before him with the one he'd dismissed only minutes ago. In under 10 seconds, she'd proven every doubter wrong and never uttered a word about her past. She stood there, posture relaxed, breath steady, no sign of exertion or pride. The room didn't need an explanation. The demonstration was enough. The fumbled drills, the quiet anonymity, the awkward timing, all of it had been a deliberate test, and every person in the room had failed. The instructor's voice, when it finally came, was thin and uncertain. "Why come here?" The question hung in the air, brittle and exposed. She answered without hesitation. "Curiosity." The words settled over the group, as if it explained everything and nothing at once. Her gaze drifted across the faces, some still pale, some downcast, a few searching for a way to undo what had been said and done. She saw the former reservists' clenched fists, the instructor's unsteady hands, the silent shifting of feet. She catalogued each reaction, a habit she'd never unlearned. She adjusted the strap of her duffel, the canvas brushing softly against her side. No one moved to block her path as she turned toward the exit. The instructor watched her go, his face caught between regret and something that looked like awe. The door closed behind her, its sound barely more than a breath. Out on the other side, the fluorescent lights still buzzed, the world unchanged. But inside the gym, everything had shifted. The instructor's whistle sounded thin, the usual sharpness gone. He tried to call the class back to order, but his voice lacked conviction, trailing off into instructions that no longer carried weight. "Like this," he said, but his demonstration was half-formed, the movement missing its mark. He watched his own hands as if unfamiliar with them, and the lesson ended before it really began. People moved through the next drill with a new awkwardness. The woman in the expensive leggings, who had led the laughter earlier, kept glancing at the empty space by the wall where the newcomer's bag had rested. Her hands hovered, uncertain, before each attempt, her confidence replaced by a nervous energy that made her stumble through the sequence. Her partner waited without comment, eyes fixed on the floor, both of them careful not to draw attention. A single cough echoed in the room, and immediately, several heads turned as if bracing for another surprise. The easy banter that had filled the first half of class was gone, replaced by a hush broken only by the shuffle of feet and the muted sound of bodies striking the mats. Each movement seemed rehearsed, as if the group was now performing for an audience they could no longer see. The instructor tried to salvage the lesson, his words halting. He offered corrections, but each one faded before it reached the mat. For the first time, he hesitated before approaching the students, his authority undercut by the memory of the demonstration he could not match. The class followed his lead, but their motions were subdued, their focus scattered. No one wanted to be noticed. When the instructor called for a final demonstration, his eyes flicked involuntarily to the door before he caught himself. He gestured for someone to step forward, but no one volunteered. The silence stretched until the newcomer moved, her steps measured, her posture unchanged. She executed a takedown with a precision that made the previous hour's drills look decorative. The room watched, silent, until a single uncertain clap broke the spell, followed by a scattering of applause that faded almost as soon as it began. Cool-down stretches happened in silence. The instructor's usual closing remarks about progress and persistence trailed off when he saw the class already packing up. Bags were zipped, water bottles stowed, shoes laced quickly. The woman in leggings left first, not looking at anyone, her exit brisk and silent. Someone bumped a bench and apologized under their breath. The instructor lingered by the stereo, pretending to adjust the cables. His throat moved, but the words he tried to find never left his mouth. He watched as the last of the class gathered their things, each person moving with more caution than before, as if the rules of the room had changed and no one wanted to make the next mistake. The newcomer remained at the edge, stretching quietly, her presence still anchoring the space. When she finally stood and lifted her bag, the group parted without a word. No one commented on the worn strap or the faded canvas. She walked to the door, her steps unhurried, and the room seemed to hold its breath. As she reached the exit, the class waited, the moment balanced on the edge of something unspoken. She gathered her bag with a single, practiced motion, the zipper's teeth closing in a line that sounded louder than it should have in the muted room. The strap settled onto her shoulder, falling into place as if it belonged there, as if this was always the way she carried herself, efficient, contained, ready. The aisle that opened before her was not announced, but made by the silent shifting of bodies, a path carved by the gravity of her presence. No one needed to be told to move. They simply did, drawn back by something unspoken, the memory of her demonstration still bright in their minds. The woman who'd mocked her earlier pressed herself close to the wall, knuckles pale where they gripped the edge of a gym mat. The instructor stood by the stereo, his clipboard forgotten against his chest, eyes fixed on the floor. His authority, so easily projected at the start of class, now felt brittle and uncertain, as if he was waiting for permission to speak, and knew it would not come. The room was a study in recalibration, people adjusting their sense of what was possible, what strength could look like, and who they might be sitting next to on any given evening. Her footsteps made almost no sound on the polished wood, but the space she left behind was charged, the air thinner somehow. Near the door, the former reservist straightened, unconsciously mirroring the newcomer's posture, shoulders set, chin level, the old instincts surfacing in the presence of someone who had lived what others only trained for. No words passed between them. None were needed. She paused at the threshold, one hand resting on the doorframe. The night pressed in from outside, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and distant rain. She didn't look back. There was no need for a final glance or a parting remark. The closure was in the act itself, her measured stride, the weight of the duffel, the unbroken line of her spine. The room behind her exhaled, as if released from a long-held breath, the tension draining out in a slow, collective sigh. The door shut with a quiet click, not a slam. That single sound seemed to mark the end of something, the easy judgments, the hierarchy of the room, the comfort of assumptions left unchallenged. For those inside, the evening would replay in fragments the sudden shift in power, the silent command of a raised hand, the realization that the story they thought they were part of had changed without warning. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. Streetlights cast their weak glow onto the sidewalk, the city's pulse distant and even. She walked, the emblem in her bag a familiar weight, her pace unhurried. The world went on around her, the ordinary hum of traffic and far-off sirens. But she carried something different with her now, not the burden of having to prove herself, but the quiet aftermath of having done so, leaving behind a room that would remember her long after the lights were turned off. She moved into the darkness between street lamps, the sound of her steps swallowed by the hush of the evening, the city's rhythm folding around her as she continued on her way. Inside her apartment, she set the duffel down with care, the emblem case inside settling against the floorboards. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and yesterday's coffee, the kind of domestic scent that belonged to a life she had built piece by piece, far from the places that had shaped her. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink, watching the thin swirl of chalky gym soap circle the drain. The fridge rattled to life behind her, a normal sound in a normal place, but her thoughts moved elsewhere. She didn't replay the evening's events or dwell on the faces that had shifted from derision to awe. The truth of her life was quieter than that. She had learned long ago that silence was its own kind of shield, more effective than any retort or display. The badge, hidden away in its case, was not a trophy. It was a reminder. Her past was never truly erased, only tucked out of sight, surfacing in moments when anonymity slipped. She'd stopped counting those moments. They no longer stung or satisfied. They simply were. Sometimes, when the world pressed too close, she felt the weight of the dog tags beneath her shirta, cool, familiar pressure against her chest. They were not for show. They marked the line between who she had been and who she tried to be now. The habit of standing with her left thumb curled against her index knuckle, the scar along her hairline, the way she waited for the light to change even when the street was empty, these were the traces left behind. The quiet details that told her story even when she never spoke it aloud. She moved through the apartment with practiced efficiency, returning the dish towel to its hook, flipping off the kitchen light. In the bedroom, she slipped beneath cool sheets, the city's faint hum pressing through the window. The memories, when they came, were neither welcome nor resisted. They were part of her, woven into the fabric of her routine. Yet tonight, there was only the steady pulse of traffic and the slight pressure of the tags against her sternum. She didn't need to prove anything, not to herself, not to the strangers who had filled the gym with laughter and then silence. Her strength was not in the stories others might tell about her, but in the quiet certainty she carried with her, the knowledge that truth endures even when unspoken. The world would keep moving, and she would move with it, her presence leaving a mark that would outlast her absence. Somewhere outside, a car door closed, and voices faded. The city settled, and with it, the echoes of the evening. In the hush that followed, she closed her eyes, already knowing that what had been revealed could not be returned to secrecy. The next day would arrive, ordinary as ever, but the ripples of that night would continue, just beneath the surface, unacknowledged but impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, the community center settled into a new, careful rhythm. The bulletin board by the entrance, once crowded with overlapping flyers, displayed a single white notice. Self-defense class cancelled until further notice. Its edges stayed crisp, untouched by the usual thumbprints and coffee rings, as if no one dared disturb it. People paused in front of it longer than they meant to, eyes flicking to the gym doors, then back to their own reflections in the glass. The hallway chatter, once easy and loud, softened to a hush whenever the topic of that night surfaced. The instructor's absence became its own kind of presence. He didn't return for his usual Monday night slot, didn't stop by for forgotten gear or offer explanations. His name was quietly removed from the staff list, replaced with a new instructor whose credentials were posted in neat block letters. Those who had watched him command the room now spoke of him in the past tense, their voices tinged with something like caution. The reason for his departure was never made official. It hardly needed to be. Other changes followed, subtle but unmistakable. A new policy appeared in the staff handbook. All employees were to wear visible ID badges at all times. No announcement accompanied the update. The rule simply appeared, and no one questioned its origin. The receptionist tapped her badge against her chest during check-in, a silent reminder, while the volleyball coach clipped his to his lanyard and kept it in view. The director, usually brisk and distracted, now lingered in the lobby, watching as staff and visitors alike adjusted to the new protocol. The space where her duffel had spilled became a kind of landmark. During open gym, people stepped around it, as if it still held the imprint of that moment, careful not to claim the territory. Instructors rearranged mats to avoid the spot. Even the janitor, rolling up the gym floor at closing, paused a second longer there before moving on. Conversations shifted in tone. The woman who once joked about thrift store sneakers now arrived in nondescript sweats, her laughter quieter, her glances more frequent. The stocky man who'd partnered with the newcomer took to arriving early, claiming a spot near the exit, his back to the wall. No one mentioned the incident directly, but the air in the center felt more charged, as if everyone had learned to look twice at the people around them. Rumors traveled quickly, growing with each retelling. Some said a government agent had visited. Others insisted the woman had been undercover all along. The details blurred, but the lesson remained. Assumptions could be costly, and strength often wore an ordinary face. The center's routines resumed, but the atmosphere changed. Staff meetings lingered on topics like professionalism and vigilance. New signs reminded everyone to clean up after themselves and respect shared spaces. The bulletin board eventually filled with fresh flyers, but those who'd been present that night still glanced over their shoulders before pinning anything new. Her quiet reveal prompted protocol changes and a new respect for the ordinary proof that true strength often arrives unannounced. The gym mats, still marked by the faint impressions of feet and hands, bore silent witness to the night the room learned to measure its assumptions more carefully. When the dust settles and routines resume, it's easy to forget that the people around us carry stories we'll never see. Lieutenant Commander Aurora Vale chose a life out of the spotlight, her strength measured not by recognition but by the quiet certainty of her actions. Her silence was deliberately a shield against both praise and scrutiny. When you next meet someone who seems ordinary, remember that warriors can walk unnoticed. Share your own moment of surprise in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful truths remain unspoken, and real power is found in what's quietly withheld.